Hello everyone, and welcome to this new episode of Guida Galattica per Fisioterapisti podcast. Today I'm really happy to welcome on our podcast Mark Leder. Hi Mark, how are you?
Very well, thanks for the invitation. I hope I don't, not expected to speak Italian like you did then.
Thanks Mike, thanks for the opportunity to have a chat with you today. So as always for our guests, we normally ask to introduce themselves to our community. So if you would like to tell us something more about yourself, about your background and your professional experiences.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. And if I go back to the very first sort of interest in football really, was as a young child growing up in the northwest of England many years ago, but we only ever really played two sports at that time. It was either football or cricket. Football in the winter and cricket in the summer. So football's been sort of inbred within the family all this time, really. Then about 17 years old, I hurt my knee playing football, the lateral ligament injury to the knee, and a meniscal injury that needed removal of that. And so I was probably out of action playing local football. I was never a professional athlete, but I was out for 12 months, treated by physios at the local hospital, working in the gym, working in the pool. And at the time, I had no real idea what to do beyond my A-levels. And so I thought this job looked all right, really. So I then asked a little bit more about how to be applying for that sort of background. And I had a 12-month sabbatical after A-levels to strengthen my CV, which was pretty poor. So I was never an academic, and I'm still not really an academic. So I found it very difficult at school to motivate myself for any subjects. I was more interested in playing sport and being out and about. So I had a bit of a culture shock having to work in a bank for 12 months, which was, no disrespect to people that work in a bank, was a soul destroying experience from day one. So I did a couple of other subjects and then in the evening at school, night school as we called it, and I got some work experience on a regular basis at the hospital with the same people that treated me. I went for an interview, a second interview to the college, and got a place, and I've never looked back since. And so I've been in the industry in some way since the age of 21. And from then on, didn't stay working in the National Health Service too long before I went into professional football. And I've had a very good, lucky enough to have been in football for probably 30 to 40 years with different clubs from non-league football. And I said to somebody the other day, even my own lads who are finishing uni now and working, but I can remember writing 92 letters to 92 football league clubs, all of them looking for work, sending his CV off, and I had 14 replies. All said no thanks, they weren't interested. And so that was a lesson in life that really, don't be frightened of rejection. You're going to get plenty of rejection, and in this industry of football, you can be rejected and moved on from your club through no fault of your own. It's just the way that the game is. So I think I'm hardy enough to not take anything personally. If somebody wants to replace me, fine, do what you need to do. So that was a lesson to say, if you want something, enough, then don't stop trying. Keep motivating yourself, keep networking people, and you'll get a break. And if you break, use the break properly, and lucky enough, you move up the ladder. So from non-league football, I've worked in the old 4th and 3rd divisions, which is now Division 2, Division 1, the Championship, and 12, 14 years in the Premier League with 3 different clubs. And so coming out of football, I've done quite a lot of teaching for the Football Association, worked in universities, worked for the English FA, and now concentrate just looking after a Football Science and Rehab master's degree at UCLan, which is an online distance learning course. And I do a number of consultancy type positions with different people when there's a problem. They never get hold of me when everything's going okay. So I enjoy that, but I don't have the day-to-day grind of working in football, which I know for you guys that do that, it's a big ask, 7 days a week, and it's not after a while you get a bit of burnout, I'm sure. So that's my background.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And then I want to start straight with a tough question. So what qualities and skills do you think are necessary for a physio who wants to work in professional football as you did?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think that the way I was trained helped me a little bit. I was trained by service personnel, so people from the armed forces. So they led a bit of discipline, and I needed that because I've just said at the beginning I was a bit sloppy as a student at school, distracted too easily. But I knew, having experienced something bad by working in a bank, that I needed to knuckle down and do my work, and that helped me to be disciplined. So I think you do need a little bit of discipline, and I think with discipline comes standards of your presentation, how you present yourself, from the way you look, the sort of clothes that you wear, and your personality. We were always taught to be quite edging on being arrogancy a little bit, but very confident was what they were trying to do, which I think confidence with your players and your coaches is really important. You don't have to be the best clinical physiotherapist in the world, to survive and do very well in football. But I think if players respect you, and that is not something that's a given, you need to build that, and you build it by being confident and being fair, being organised. It's nothing worse than sitting outside a treatment room in the morning and there's 6 people waiting to see you. Why did you bring them all in at the same time? We can only see one person at a time, so give 2 or 3 of them a little bit longer. You can come in a bit later today, then we'll swap you over the next day. And it just creates a smoother, calmer environment. So I think organisation, communication is really important. And that was always something that I found pretty easy, generally speaking, to be an outgoing guy. I like to be around people, and that never came difficult to me. But I know that some people obviously are introverted a little bit, and it's not easy to be, maybe in big groups of people. They might be very good clinicians. And actually, sometimes I like that mix of personality in a department. So we've got somebody that is loud and jovial and laughing, and on the other side of it, there's another guy in the team that's a little bit quieter, and that's good for players, because players don't always like bubbly, loud people. They like somebody to quietly have a little chat with. So I quite like that. I'm not trying to say that you need to be an extrovert. Everybody's a personality in themselves. So I think the softer skills are the most important skills, and I call that communication, organisation, enthusiasm, being motivated, and also standing up for yourself, being pretty firm and fair in what you do, and to be a good listener. And sometimes as therapists, we don't listen, but we do listen, but we maybe don't listen enough. We're too busy trying to tell somebody what they've done and what they need to do, instead of just calm down a little bit and let them talk to you first. And I think that's something I've got better with. I wouldn't say initially I was good at that. I was probably too busy trying to solve the problem and then not really allowing them to speak and just get to know them as a person, I think, players. So I think that empathetic skills is something very useful within the game. And just the humility of knowing that you're going to make mistakes, and don't be frightened of making mistakes. I think that's a big thing. It's part of learning, and it's good. If you keep making the same mistake time and time again, then that's just silly, and that's not good. But I think making mistakes is good, and ask for help always. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength to know that something's not going quite well. What would you do with this? Ring a colleague, email, text, and just discuss as a group. We don't know everything. I think as long as you understand that, that's a good trait to have.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned a lot of, I think, very important quality skills. And so my next question is then, in which ways are you trying to develop those qualities in your students at UCLan, at the MSc in Football Science and Rehabilitation?
Yeah, I think that I think when you get a group of people that are qualified, they've done a degree, and they're working in football, some of them, and they're working at one club that they've always been at. That's a good example, really, where somebody's worked at a club for 3 or 4 years. It's the only club that they've worked at. Then I see quite often that they think that's the only way to work. So then when somebody's saying something different to that view or that strategy or approach to how they work, then often you can get a question back to you where they say, well, that's not right. We do this and we do that. And I think that it's that sort of, well, one thing, don't be frightened of talking. So that's good that they then communicate what they do in the club and how they work and why they work like that. Then I sort of would throw in a different view, maybe something I've read or something I've done or something I've seen from other people. And then it opens and stimulates a debate. So that is what we call problem-based learning, really. And I think that's a big thing of how we drive every module, is to try and put it into context of working in football. This isn't about being in the laboratory or a classroom. This is about having to make decisions really quickly, whether it's performance monitoring or whether it's an injury that needs to be referred on, or we're going to try to do that. So you've got to have sort of quick decisions. And I think the slicker and smarter you work, but an openness is good. If you come with a closed mind, those students generally find part of the journey that they begin to widen their knowledge, and they realize that maybe what they've been doing for 3 or 4 years isn't wrong. It's just there is another way of doing it. So if that seems to start to twitch a little bit or not work as well, then try to do that. So I think we try and embrace that collegiate feeling that you are just one person within a multidisciplinary team. There's many ways, as we say in the UK, to skin a cat. It means there's many ways to treat anything. There's not one right or one wrong. And I think that open-minded flexibility is a big way that we teach and learn, but also it's a big way you work, in my view, that you can take on board other people's views. And I think the course itself finally is more driven to vocation. None of this is really sitting in a classroom approach. We're trying to make sure that everything is transferable into the field that you work in, and therefore it's relevant and specific to working in football. Whereas I think on some courses it's a really good theory, but in practice you'll never do that because it's just not workable in professional football.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you mentioned this, you touched on this already about the soft skills and how important they are in dealing with players. And but I think they're very important to deal with the other colleagues, to deal with coaches, and to deal with everyone within a football club. And also, just before the recording, we were talking about leadership and all other sorts of qualities. Do you think those qualities are teachable, despite the fact that obviously everyone is different and we have different personalities and character?
It's a good question. I think on the bit of how we deal with coaches and managers, they can be teachable. They are teachable. Because I think the first thing to understand, the minute we walk into a football club, in the hierarchical structure of who works in the football department, everywhere we are at the lower end. And as long as we know our position, regardless of what we think and where we should be and what we should earn and everything else, we are at the bottom, and we always will be. And I quite like that. It's just, we are what we are. We're relatively honest people. We're doing a good job. We're reasonably well paid for our profession, but we'll never be. There used to be a saying about officers and the infantry, or the poorer end of the soldiers, really. And in an army unit, the officers are the main people. So the coach, the manager, the board of directors, maybe the players, actually. And then you've got the lower levels of the infantry, the foot soldiers, and that's where we are. And as long as we understand that, I think that's okay. But it's being respectful to the manager. You might not agree with him, and he might not agree with you, but I think you've just got to accept that if you go in bombastic and dogmatic about, no, he's definitely not fit, bang, 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 then you're going to come up with arguments. I think the way that you speak to people, the way that you get the message across, can be taught in a way, but some people don't find it easy to do that. I'm not saying it's easy, but it gets easier the more you deal with that situation. So I think that those things can be taught, about how to deal with players, how to deal with coaches, what to say, how to word something. I can remember a player who played for England when I was at Liverpool Football Club, and he was an England international. And I said, I think you could play with that knee injury, but it's not my knee, and I'm not a professional football player. It's your knee, but I think you could play with it without making the injury worse. And his first defense was, so you're telling me there's nothing wrong with my knee? No, I didn't say that. I said, if it was my knee, I would go and try to do A, B, C, and D, and I think I could play with it without really making it worse. And that was something that was tried to, be twisted by the player, who was that sort of guy, really, a little bit, very defensive. But in the cold light of day, he did train and he did play and he was okay. And then a few weeks later, to be fair to him, he said, I must have misinterpreted what you'd said. I felt that you were saying I should be playing, there's nothing wrong with my knee, which clearly I didn't say that. So your message, I thought, well, at least he's come to see me, but maybe my message wasn't clear enough in what I was trying to tell him to do. So I think a throwaway comment is really dangerous. You need to sort of be careful how you deal with that. But again, I think that is teachable just with experience of dealing with situations and circumstances like that. And eventually the good therapists latch onto that, and it becomes just a way of how they work. If you're very forceful, very argumentative, and very protective, then I don't think you'll survive very long in the world of football. Leadership is a different thing, and I'm not 100% sure that everybody can lead, and I'm sure not everybody wants to lead, and I'm 100% sure that some people are forced into a position of leadership that they don't really want to do, and they don't enjoy it, and it becomes sort of a little weight that they're carrying around, and then they start to change as a personality and a character. And I think that's sad when that occurs, and that's when clubs should be careful really about promoting people into positions where you're possibly setting them up to fail. And I think good clubs know the staff, and they know those that could lead, and they also knows that maybe some people aren't real leaders, but will give them a chance. And it very rarely works that. Your gut feeling is often the right feeling on many things. And I think that's a good example.
Yeah, definitely. And we know our physiotherapy undergrad doesn't really teach us a lot about sport injuries, and definitely not about football injuries. But a lot of students and physios love the game, love football, and they would like to work full-time in football. So I want to hear from you what to expect, what's actually the role of a full-time physio in football, and what are the differences compared to, for example, MSK physio working in private practice or NHS physio?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, nothing's really changed over the years too much in terms of when I first went in the NHS to how the NHS is. It has changed clearly within in the structures of how they work. But generally speaking, it's Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, set lists, very structured, very routine, half an hour appointments. If it's in an MSK department, if you're working on the wards, it's a different environment. But, people are ill. People are seriously ill in a hospital. And the way you speak to patients in a private practice or in the NHS is completely different at times than we speak to players who are ultimately, they're our patients. But the way football is, and it's not just football, it's any sport really, that it builds a working practice of staff and players and coaches, and we're all together. And the language, I dread to think what I've used over the years of how you're talking to people and shouting and bawling, and you can't do that in a national health service. So it would be quite shocking, I think, for some people to come in and listen and watch how we do behave. So I think the time element, the commitment, is something that I think is getting harder and harder for people to do. And I think that that's why there's such an attrition rate of physios that come into football, certainly maybe in the academy level, where the pay isn't the best, but the hours are long, the evenings, the weekends, the traveling, and they just get, almost like a burnout, really, like athletes get burnout from just listening and playing sport from a very young age. Almost, you ask footballers, do you really enjoy playing the game? And I think the honest ones would say some of them do like playing the game and they still have a passion for it, and others, I'm not so sure they do. And I think there's a danger that people that come into the academy level where they see it as it is, it maybe puts them off and they move out of football and they go and do something else, which is probably the right thing for them to do. But on the flip side, when you know that that's what the job's about and you like it and you put up with it and you can see your pathway moving up into the senior level of football, then you do become hardened to those hours. But this leadership thing that we're talking about before, what I did at clubs was there would be a rota of staff that would be not in every day. Occasionally, once a month, you'd be given 2 days off, 3 days off. And then some next month, it will be another 2 people's turn to give staff a break from the day-to-day of dealing with people's problems. And that was initially met with coaches, usually old ones like me, that would turn around and say, well, back in the day, we didn't do this and we didn't do that. Yeah, well, that's how things have changed. You did a lot of things in the past that weren't right. And that's life in every walk of life. So I think it's good if you've got a department where you've got some numbers of people. Maybe you can bring up from the academy into the first team a guy to work with the first team as a part of a learning experience, while somebody takes 2 or 3 days off to recharge the batteries and bring them back in. And I think that helps in the way that they treat people. I think it's the way it's to help the way they deal with people to become a little bit short-tempered and moody if we a sign of burnout, that sort of thing. And so I think if you come in with an open mind and you have a real passion for football, then I think you will survive and you'll do and thrive very well. But I think leaders can also assist on giving people some regular little breaks away from the club. If the players are off for 2 or 3 days, then that doesn't mean the staff are always off for 2 or 3 days, because there's always somebody injured. And if we don't have any injuries, we'd start worrying, because I don't think I've ever been in the treatment room in any club I've ever been in the 30 to 40 years. And even day one of pre-season training, there's always been somebody injured from last year. So we'll never have an empty room. And as long as we know that, that's okay to do. But I think those key things would be, a difference. And I think that the last point will be, with patients in the NHS particularly, tell them to do something, explain why they do it. They generally will do that. Different age groups, different generations. With footballers, they might not do that. The first thing they might do is ring their agent. Is this right? Is this right? Or they go online and they come back in and they've read 10 things. Why I should be doing this? I could be doing that. What do you think of this? Where do you start? You've got 10 opinions then, and we've got to have one line of attack. So I think that can be quite frustrating for maybe younger physios that would expect what you've told the client, the player or the client to do, that they just do it. Where now there's more questioning, there's more debate, which I don't think is bad, but it can be a little bit, testing for the individual.
Yeah, definitely. And talking about now postgraduate qualifications, I think one of the reasons, and I'm not saying that that's the only reason, but many people apply for postgraduates to postgraduate courses because they want to be more competitive on the job market. So I want to ask you if you think that's true, and also if at UCLan you have links with then clubs, so that there's a clear pathway or a help for students to be more competitive and then find jobs as well in football.
Yeah, I think that working for a university, everybody thinks that you're very academic, which obviously I've said from the beginning, I'm not really a very academic person. I've got more experience of working in football than I have in academia, and that was a deliberate ploy by me, who was more interested in that area. But the course or courses that we've got at UCLan are really should be vocationally driven. We want you to get the degree, the qualification and the stamp to go and work, but they're driven by giving people vocational skills. And to do that, you need staff, lecturing staff, university staff that are up to speed on what is required for the industry. And that changes, as you know, every 2 or 3 years. There's something changing all the time. Lots of things are changing. So to make you contemporary and up to date as a program, you need to constantly have that input, whether that's guest speakers that are presently working in the field, not just from football, from other sports, to open up a wider knowledge base and bring in some transferable approaches from different sports. And I think that's really good. I think that I've never asked anybody as a student, as a person being interviewed for a job, what grade of classification they got for an undergraduate degree. So in other words, if there's a job, right, okay, CV, do they fit the bill? Have they got a degree? Right, good. Is it in the relevant field? Yes. No, that's it. Forget that. Look at what experience they've done, maybe while they were at university, what clinical placements or sports placements have they been on? And that's reliant on the university. Now, where we are in the northwest of England, we're blessed that there are more football clubs within an hour of UCLan than there are in the whole of the country. So from a football perspective, there is no shortage of placements and internships and opportunities for people to do that. And we've got a heavy rugby league contingency throughout Lancashire and Yorkshire and Cumbria, and we've got rugby union as well as other sports. So there's always lots of opportunities for people to do that. So I look at that and think, what have they done outside of the university? It might be that they've done something for the local multiple sclerosis charity, British Heart Foundation, some voluntary work. Why is that important? Because you're giving your time up. You're giving your time up for nothing, and you're doing it on top of your study, on top of your clinical placement. So that sort of profile would fit my bill. Then, when you're brought in before the board of, like going to court and the judge and the jury's there, and you're being interviewed for the job, what are you looking for then? Just, do I like you? Do I get a gut feeling within a minute of talking to you that I think you'd be right, not just for me, but for the club that we've got? And what does that mean? Just a smile on your face, the presentation of yourself, the way you conduct yourself, the way you talk. And I can honestly say that you might be in a room for 40 minutes with an interview, but after 5 minutes, I've made my mind up, based on what I've just said, really. Because I think the longer you speak to people, it's a bit like examining somebody. The longer that you're with them, you can start to pick holes in things. Just go with your gut feeling. Have they got the qualifications? Do they have a reasonable CV? Have they been around a few nice placements where they've done that? Yeah, okay, bring them in, and within 5 minutes of talking to us, you get a feel. I think they could be, fitted quite nicely to our department. The worst appointments I've made, and I've made 2 or 3 bad ones, is that we've maybe 2 or 3 people to speak to, and you're employing somebody that might be the best of a bad bunch. And I don't mean it nastily that, I just mean that you don't get a feel for any of them, but we're desperate for somebody to come in. And we've done that. And each one of those has proved to be a poor appointment. What we shouldn't have done was appoint anybody and sit tight and muddle through and then try and find somebody that way. So I think I wouldn't be too worried about your degree classifications. I wouldn't be worried about a master's degree. If you've got an undergraduate degree with a reasonable amount of experience and you want to work in football, if the job that we're advertising fits that bill with your present skills, do that. You don't need a master's degree. Why do you need a UEFA license to be a strength and conditioning coach? And yet we see that all the time. I find that a dangerous ploy. If that's something that somebody's insisting on, it's like you will have a UEFA licensed coach. The reason I say that is, are they a strength and conditioning coach or are they a technical coach? And if that person starts to then become verbally around other coaches as if they're picking the team, as if they're deciding on the formation and making comments about players' abilities, I think you've jumped the other side of the wall. You've now put yourself into the officers, when really you're not an officer, you're with us, we're the infantry. You've started to jump allegiances. And I think I understand why, because obviously strength and conditioning, performance analysis does help if you've got a coaching perspective, but you are not necessarily a coach in the technicalities of playing football. That's the coaching staff do that. So I would be a little bit concerned about that. So I've done a master's degree in sports science years ago. I'm not a sports scientist, really. I'm a physio by trade, but I've got some knowledge around sports science. It's not to become a sports scientist. I just find it useful to have had other bits. But I think if you start moving too far down the side of, in that example, becoming a coach, then it's dangerous. We all know privately we have a comment, don't we? We sit in our little group and we say, he played badly today, did he? He was dreadful. Well, you'd never say that to the coach or get involved with the player about that. That's something that sits behind, out of the way. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And just the last few questions for today. One, just curious to know, what are the things that you missing now, not being in football full time anymore? And also, what are the things that you've enjoyed the most, the memories that you have?
I think the first one is more to do with, I find it still quite frustrating that things we were talking about 30 years ago are still not right. And it's as if we've made no progress at all in that. Which means at my age, you know, you think, have you got the time or the inclination to bother trying to change something that's never changed in 20 or 30 years? My wife says that's what you should do. Don't be bothering going back doing all that game. But it's a bit like a boxer, isn't it? We always think we've got one more fight in us, and I don't think I'd do it full time again. Because I think I've got too much of a good work-life balance, and I quite like the idea actually earlier on of solving problems. It's very good to just do that, just to go in and try and solve a problem, put an opinion across or whatever it is, or a strategy, and then move out, let them get on with it, and then see where it goes. So I like that, and I don't think I'll stop doing that. And I still like the game of football. So those things, no, I don't miss the grind. I don't miss the 7-day-a-week scenario. But I like the mix of what I've got now, and that's good. I think the other bit of your question, you know, I've got some great memories. I mean, I've got on my laptop, I've made notes of every club that I've been at, every single club, from non-league football all the way through to Liverpool Football Club and European games and winning things and losing things. And I keep saying I'll write a book, and not for making any money out of writing a book, but it's just my own personal thing. I've always wanted to do it, and I haven't really got the time to do that. But that will be. Is full of things that, you know, could be here all day talking about, you know, some of the memories, because I've been in such a long time. So there's lots of good memories. We met some really top draw people, some excellent footballers, some great coaches, lots of characters. And I wouldn't really change anything, really. I've always been a believer in standing for your standards and your morals, and not compromising too much on your professional guidelines. So if I felt ever that there was, you know, a conflict between me saying somebody's fit when I know that they're not, and then they get injured, I still would, you know, try and shy away from that and have a conversation. Look, if you're asking me to do this day in, day out, week in, week out, I'm not prepared to do that anymore. And I've done that in the past, and you know, much to what other people say, they wish they'd done it. But not everybody's in the right time at the right place to be able to leave a big job, and then go and get another one. I understand financially, reputation-wise, it's difficult to do that, but lots of good times. And it's, you know, there's so many things that traveling the world free, enjoy going to places that you've never been before, you probably never go again, meeting lots of people around that, going to some great night game football. I think the best game of football that I've ever been involved with was the first Liverpool Newcastle game back in the 90s, where Newcastle were going for the league title. Liverpool wanted Newcastle to win the league title rather than Man United, and we ended up beating them 4-3 in what is probably one of the best games that the Premier League have ever seen. So that night at Anfield probably was right up there with something that I've never seen before. Robbie Fowler hat-trick in, what was it, 6 or 7 minutes against Arsenal. You know, it's like you're watching from where I'd come from, you know, Burnley and Preston. It was like you've never seen anything like that in your life. But yeah, it's a good career, and perseverance is a good habit. Don't be knocked down at the first bad news. Keep going, and then eventually.
Yeah, and then exactly, Mark. And then just to summarize our chat, what are the sort of free advices or free take-home messages for physios who want to work in professional football?
I think the first thing is to get as much experience as you can in and around football, whatever it is. So I got a refereeing qualification, a coaching qualification, not a very low, but I was just lived around football all the time, and I just wanted to do little bits. And I think as long as you get experience and you network people, because unfortunately we don't like that, oh, it's jobs for the boys scenario. It isn't really. If you put yourself out and you've got a good network of people, lots of experience, and that's putting yourself out in voluntary work, unpaid work, that's a big thing people look at. They know you're not coming into this job just to be based around money. You've got some experience. So I think networking people as best you can. I think having a dream is like anything, is if you really, really want to do something, most things you can do and you will do if you persevere with it. You might not get it first time of asking. So if I look at a compatriot myself, was probably Gary Lewin, who when I was at Brighton Football Club in the old third division, he left Guy's University or hospital training as a physio and walked straight into Arsenal Football Club, where he stayed there for virtually all his career. Whereas myself, I've just said to you, non-league football, semi-pro football, Division 4, 3, 2, 1, Premier League. My journey to that took me the best part of 20 odd years to get to that level. So if you want to do it, you will do. What did I have to do? Move around the country, sacrifice your home life and move around and move about. And I think most people now would probably do that. I think it was a bit different when I was a bit younger. But having the freedom to do that and the willingness, so be mobile, go with your dream, keep persevering with things, networking, and that sort of work experience, and you'll be fine. And don't be frightened of making mistakes. You know, everybody's human.
Yeah, it's great advice. Yeah, great advice.
Okay.
Thanks. And so if some of our followers would like to be in contact with you or know more about what's the best way? The
best thing to do is you've got my email address, so you can give the email address, my university email address, to anybody that's listening. You can ask them to link in with me on LinkedIn, which is just my name again. And some of them may have linked in. I tend to not particularly look closely at who I'm linking in with. If they want to link in, they can link in with me. It doesn't really matter. It's the only bit of social media that I really do. And just the other week, by the way, a final point, that I was offered a job on LinkedIn from a division, I think they were Division 1 football club, by somebody I didn't really know, and he was the manager. And I did go and meet him and have a chat with him, only to find out a few weeks later he was sacked. So it was a good job I didn't go.
Yeah.
But the thing about that is people do read and people do link in, and your name will get around a little bit. So anyone that wants to do that, feel free to to link in with me or email me if there's something that they want to know, or a bit of advice either about any of the courses or that we do at UCLan, or anything else regarding football in the context of performance, staff and departments. Then I'm happy to sort of give my opinion for what it's worth.
Perfect. Thanks. Okay. Thanks again for your time.
No problem. So have we finished now? You stop recording?
I will do, yeah. And thanks everyone for being here today, listening to us, and hope to see you again soon for our next episode. Bye. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.